Hey, friends! Who doesn't like some high-tech underwater sci-fi action? That's why I still miss Sequest DSV. Well, the first season, anyway. Well, this time I have an underwater sci-fi curiosity for you. 1973's The Neptune Factor. Our story goes like this. An undersea project is being overseen by Dr. Andrews on board the Triton, a surface vessel doing research. There's this undersea habitat they're testing out, manned by some deep-sea divers monitoring earthquakes and stuff. Well, lo and behold, a seaquake hits, and the lab and its crew tumble over the edge of a deep-sea trench. No one can find the sea lab, and as time is running out, they call in the experimental submarine Neptune and the grumpy grouch who pilots it, Commander Blake. They go for a dive into the trench trying to find a signal from the lab. Along for this trip are two expert divers working on the research project, Mac and Bob Cousins. And there's also Dr. Leah Jansen, an oceanographer engaged to one of the trapped men. Eventually, they find their way into a weird undersea area with giant guppies, some of which attack the Neptune. Can our heroes survive the journey into the ocean depths? Will the giant fish destroy the Neptune before they can complete their mission? And giant guppies. What the hell? You'd be forgiven if you thought this was made by Irwin Allen, since this is exactly the sort of movie Irwin Allen would make. But it wasn't Allen's movie. It was made by this guy, Sandy Howard. He previously produced the Richard Harris film A Man Called Horse and several of its sequels. After The Neptune Factor, he went on to produce Meteor, The Devil's Reign, and The Island of Dr. Moreau. That's another turkey. Daniel Petrie directed this one. He directed a ton of stuff, including Fort Apache, The Bronx in 1981. He also helmed Silent Night, Lonely Night, a TV movie starring Shirley Jones and Lloyd Bridges, which I reviewed a few Christmases ago. Really like that one. In our cast, we have the stalwart Hollywood star Walter Pidgeon as the leader of the undersea project. He was no stranger to underwater sci-fi, having previously played Admiral Nelson in the Irwin Allen movie Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Unfortunately here, Pidgeon has very little to do. He's stuck on the surface vessel Triton and relegated to merely looking concerned about events. We also have the great Ernest Borgnine as Mac, the expert diver. What can I say about him? Here, he plays his usual, "to hell with the safety protocols" character. Man, I miss him. Yvette Mimieux plays the oceanographer who's engaged to one of the trapped men. She's pretty bland in this, to be honest, kind of a cardboard cutout. She doesn't ever seem too concerned about her boyfriend. She's along for the ride, but she isn't given all that much to do. Ben Gazzara is the sub-commander and expert on the experimental craft Neptune. Gotta say, he's not very interesting here either. He's stuck with a kind of one or two note character, sadly, who just seems mostly grouchy throughout the proceedings. Unfortunately, the submarine wasn't the only thing that went underwater. This picture was a big flop. It cost over $2.5 million to make and never took in enough to put it in the black. In fact, it played on TV not long after release and would crop up occasionally as an afternoon movie on the weekends. One problem here was the characters are purely stock stereotypes, hard to root for since they aren't really all that new, engaging, or interesting. Except Ernest Borgnine, of course. He was always interesting to watch. Another problem was the special effects. They start out really good, but as soon as the Neptune arrives, things go south pretty quickly. In the first place, they simply put a small model of the sub in a fish tank with tropical fish and tried to make the fish look like they were giant guppies. But the model of the Neptune looks like a toy and is oftentimes unconvincing. You can even see the outline of the decals used on the sub, making it look even more fake. And some of this fish footage seems to go on and on. Think the flyover of V'ger from Star Trek the Motion Picture, where the crew just stares in wonder for what feels like forever. Not as bad here, but you get what I mean. And there's lots of questions. How are these fish so ginormous? Aside from a reference to volcanic heat, they never have an answer. And there's all kinds of different fish and crabs and stuff here. How big is this area? Giant fish need a lot to eat and would eat up all the smaller fish relatively quickly. How can they survive long enough to grow into adults? And the fish are all ones that exist in the real world, just bigger. But if they're mutants, why don't they look the part? They look and act just like their regular, real-world counterparts, because that's what they are. Regular fish and stuff, photographed up close next to a toy submarine. And then they make a big deal out of the depth in this trench, Gazzara saying the pressure could crush the Neptune like an egg. And yet we see divers going out and swimming around. Divers at 300 meters. Now, I'm no expert, and to their credit, they do mention a special oxygen mixture that deep divers require, but 300 meters is a bit much for divers in regular scuba gear, especially if you're afraid your submarine can't handle that depth. Okay, I know. It's a movie. We have to just go with some things. If the characters were more interesting, we could easily overlook the obvious flaws. And this was made 4 or 5 years before Star Wars, so the effects are what they are. But Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea had way better model effects, and that was made in the 1960s. Just saying. So, the Neptune Factor. Sure, it's a turkey, but give this movie its due. The Neptune Factor is kind of original. It's imaginative in that special way the 1970s seemed to have in abundance. And the fish and sea creatures here were photographed in stunning detail for the big screen. So the movie is not a complete disaster. In the past decade or so, Hollywood has been on a drunken binge of remakes and reboots, most of which pale in comparison to the originals and wind up being nothing but poorly made, watered-down disappointments. But I always thought the Neptune Factor was one of the few films that would truly benefit from a remake. It's not The Abyss, and different enough from that to avoid those kind of comparisons. Modern special effects, a better grasp of the science and mechanics of underwater vehicles, and better written characters could make it a hit. Of course, we all know Hollywood can't do that today. They don't have the writers, the ability, or the will to entertain audiences. But still, down the road, when talent is once more ascendant in Hollywood, it could be done, and done well. The Neptune Factor has a lot of problems, that's true, but I still kind of like it. Always have. And it has Ernest Borgnine in top form. He's worth the watch for sure. When the movie works, it looks great, and when it doesn't work, the flaws are pretty painfully obvious. Still, it's interesting enough and original enough. I'm giving this one 2 paws. Might be generous, but, well, I'm giving it 2 paws anyway. You take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.